side is probably a good way to start. Okay, so when it comes to pumping, for the most part, the gold standard is having a double electric breast pump. So what that means is one that plugs into the wall and is going to pump both breasts at the same time. I have a couple examples behind me that I can show you, but that's usually the more effective at emptying your breast, and it's a little bit more efficient. Then the next step would be probably for a more experienced later in your lactation journey would be a wireless cordless pump. There are so many now on the market, which are great because they can be pretty discreet under your clothes. Those of us who are shift workers, teachers, who have a really hard time figuring out when they can fit in pumping, when they have a schedule like they have, we really like those wireless cordless pumps. And also for those who are running after toddlers all day, but are also needing to pump, those are really good. I don't always recommend them as your only pump. You'll still want to have your plug in, sit down pump as for when you're home and when you can. So yep, Jen's showing there her pump in style. I've got here also a little Spectra. So this would be your classic pump. Jen showed her pump in style. Here's mine. Again, double breast pump. And then this is technically a Willow. It's one of the examples of a wearable pump. This one, you're going to want a very supportive nursing bra or nursing tank to keep it secure to your body, but it is a little bulky, so you do have to be mindful of what you're wearing to be discreet, but this is one of the wearable pumps.
If you're just walking around your house trying to do dishes, who cares? But
totally fine, yes, but wear a secure bra so when you bend over to the dishwasher you don't spill your milk. And then a good little favorite of mine, but is not necessarily recommended as your only pump, would be a hand pump. These are really great to have, on your nightstand if you're going through any engorgement phase, that kind of thing, to be able to just easily put it on. It's simple, it's easy to use, and we can go through how to use them. One thing that Jen had also mentioned, walking around. Typically, when you are pumping, you are going to be more effective at getting your milk out. First, if you hand express, which we can go over before you pump, but then also hands-on pumping while you're pumping, using your hands to massage your breasts and really get out any places you might feel those kinked, backed up milk. And a great way to do that is a hands-free pumping bra. So they come in all different styles. Some people like straps. I always prefer to strapless so that you can just put it on, Velcro it. And what happens is you take this is called your flange. You take it, obviously you'd have it on your bare breast. You're not gonna do that on Facebook. You're gonna line it up to your body. And then there's a nice little hole right here for it to come out for then you to connect to your pumping parts. So having a nice hands-free bra is really essential if you're going to be pumping really at all in your journey.
And I'll show the one I have here. I have the Lilu bra. This is a really cool new company that started with a pumping bra that actually massages you. So it's kind of got like a little charging pack here in the middle. And when it's got power in it, then there's these little air pocket things inside that inflate and deflate while you're pumping to kind of like give that massaging to your breast, help make sure you're getting as much milk out as you can. So if you do find that you're having any sort of supply issues, which actually I know we'll talk more about later, like making sure that you've got that massaging action, whether with your hands or with a bra, can be really helpful to get the most out.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are also devices I'm sure we'll talk about later, but devices on the market that are warming vibrators that you can also use during your pumping or nursing journey.
I was like, I have a little one right here.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So that's kind of the gist of the different types of pumps that are out there. There are a lot of then accessory products that as you go into your pumping journey or deeper in your pumping journey, you may find them helpful for you. You can adapt a lot of your current pumps to then more, for example, battery operated smaller pumps that then would still connect, like this one, for example, connects to your Spectra parts. So as your journey evolves, then you can look into some of these other products. But for the most part, I would just start with your basic, what you have from whether it's your insurance company or what you purchase, and then go from there. It's really important to know the right size flanges. These flanges come in all different sizes because our bodies come in all different sizes. There are some great tools to know how well you fit in your flange and whether it's too big, too small, and also your size changes throughout your journey. So you might need different sizes. Each breast might be a different size.
I didn't actually know that it could change well through your
Yeah.
journey. I used the tool, I think on Willow's website, they have one where you can actually use your iPhone to try and like measure the size and shape of your nipple. And then it helps guide you to which size flange to get. But I think I have like 21 millimeter, 24 and 27 millimeters. And I tried all 3 different sizes till I found one that I could use pain-free.
Perfect. Yeah. And there are great measuring tools. And at the same time, I always recommend pumping for at least a minute and then looking at what is your nipple doing inside the flange to then also determine whether it's the right size for you. And again, there are a ton of guides out there that can help you identify if you're going to have that right size flange for you. Okay, so also just pretty much all the pumps are a little bit different, but they have the same general idea. They're all going to have at least two different phases. So one is usually called a stimulation phase, where it will be a faster, quicker suck. And that's just replicate a baby who is initially latching on. They're going to suck a little bit less of a pulling motion and more of a quick quiver action to get your body to let down. And then there's the second phase, which is an expression phase, where it tends to be more of a strong pull, slower. This is when your milk is flowing and it mimics the baby actually sucking and then swallowing that bolus and repeating that action. Typically, you're going to do that stimulation phase for about 2 minutes or until you see your letdown happen. And then either the pump will automatically switch you over, or you can switch it over to that expression phase for actually letting down your milk. I will say that Spectra has a lot more options for adjusting your suction strength and speed. And honestly, Pinterest has a ton of recipes that I think is really nice for those who are overwhelmed by too many options. You can go and try these different recipes and see if which one works best for your body. So yeah, so those are the different phases and how most breast pumps work. All breast pumps have different parts, but a lot of parts. When it comes to cleaning, when you initially get your pump set, you will want to sterilize it. The only ones that come already sterilized are the ones that are given in the hospital. So unless you are receiving it in the hospital, go ahead and sterilize it. You can either boil in water for 5 minutes or use steam sterilization. I know there are steaming bags, there are steaming kits, there are entire sterilization devices, whatever your jam is. Sterilize before your first use. And then every time you pump, you want to take apart every piece, including for medulla, this membrane. A lot of milk gets trapped in here. And this membrane is really the reason your pump works. So if you don't put it on perfectly and flat, you might not get suction. So if you lose suction, always look at your membrane and see if.
And what's the lifespan for one of those? I know you're supposed to replace them every so often.
They are. So it kind of depends on how much you're pumping. If you are an exclusive pumper, they typically recommend replacing this or, pardon me, the duckbill valve. On this one nicely. They recommend replacing it about once a month if you're exclusively pumping. If you're pumping less often, then you're going to probably do it every few months, or if you notice a dip in your supply. Anytime you notice a dip, this is often the culprit.
Interesting. And somebody was asking, can you use the sterilizing setting on your dishwasher for sterilization? I've never tried that.
So you can use the dishwasher as an option for cleaning your pump parts, but I'm not quite sure about the sterilization process since every dishwasher is different.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave that to your discretion and your particular appliance. But yes, a lot of people use the dishwasher for actually cleaning their parts. The CDC basically recommends when it comes time to clean, take all the parts apart. You are not going to be washing typically any of the tubings. These tubings are a vacuum, and so they shouldn't be getting wet, or you could promote some mold growth. So if you notice condensation at the end of your pumping session, keep running your pump without it being attached to you to dry out these. But anyways, the other parts, what CDC recommends is to have a designated clean basin that is just for your baby bottles, pump parts, those items, nipple shields, pacifiers, and doing hot soapy water to completely wash it off, rinse it afterwards, and then have a dry designated place for, again, baby items. You want to let it air dry. Don't use a towel so that you don't introduce more bacteria to it. And that would be your cleaning process. And the CDC recommends sterilizing once a day, at least for the first 3 months of your baby's life, or if your baby has any immunocompromised issues, they're premature, any of those things, you'll want to do daily sterilization of your pump parts.
Yeah, I confess to being lax on my sterilization. I feel like a mom hack, which I don't know if it's recommended by doctors or folks, maybe you guys know, but I see it all the time recommended in moms groups on Facebook, is to have a bin in your refrigerator where you can toss all of your pump parts, and then only wash them every couple of days. So as long as they're staying cold in the fridge with your milk, they're not necessarily growing bacteria, so you can reuse the pump parts without having to wash them quite as constantly.
So that got not recommended 2 or 3 years ago. So it used to be the recommendation from CDC, and then they put out an official statement that it especially, even their official statement was that you couldn't do it just for the day's worth of collection, which back 6 years ago is exactly what I did because it was the recommendation, but they did back up on it. Now, I am someone who teaches best practice recommendations, and then you as families and parents get to choose what works for you and what you're going to follow. So just putting that out there, that's not a judgment statement. That is just, here's the information and do with it what you will.
Thank you very much for clarifying.
Yeah, no problem. Always judgment free. You do you, families. What works for you is what works for you.
That's awesome.
All right. So anything, Jen, that you think I missed in terms of
No. Oh, well, I guess you did have
basics?
About storing pump parts in Ziploc bags.
Yes. So storing for in between once your pump parts are dry, then store them in a sealable enclosed place that's just for them. So whether that's a big Ziploc baggie or a big plastic bin, whatever your jam is, you want to keep it dry, clean, and away from anything that could contaminate things.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I also didn't mention, before pumping, washing, any of this stuff, wash your hands. Make sure you're doing all of this with nice, clean hands, freshly cleaned. Once you have your baby, sorry, earbuds don't stay in my ear holes. Once you have your baby, you will be washing your hands all the time. So get yourself a nice, gentle soap that you can use a lot, and make sure that before starting any of your touching of your pumping equipment, that you're doing that with clean hands.
Amazing. All right, great. Well, so let's switch over to Brandy now. And maybe Brandy, you can tell us a little bit about when should you start pumping, before or after the baby is born? You know, what kind of your recommendations, especially if your baby is born early versus later?
Yeah, so it really depends on the person and your situation. So there is something that is called colostrum harvesting, usually done in the 3rd trimester towards the end of the pregnancy. But if you do decide to try the colostrum harvesting, always check with your OBGYN to see if that is okay to do. Every pregnancy is different and every situation is different. So always make sure that you talk to your OBGYN prior to doing this. But a lot of parents will do colostrum harvesting, which is collecting the colostrum, which is the very first milk that the baby gets once they're born. And they will put that in little syringes, label them with the date and time that they collected it, and put it in the freezer for their baby if their baby's born early and has to be in the NICU, or if they just want to have that early milk for when the baby is born, they have that available. It's not necessary to do. It's not something that is mandatory, but a lot of mothers that do it do find that it is beneficial, and they do like to do the colostrum harvesting. So once your baby is born and the placenta has been delivered, your brain triggers your body to start producing milk. And so when you are breastfeeding, some mothers, it depends on the situation again. So some mothers will exclusively breastfeed and wait to start pumping until they have to start going back to work, or they're going to have somebody that's going to be watching their child, where they would need to be away for an extended period of time. Some families just decide that they want to be exclusive pumpers. I know for myself, I had 2 of my 4 babies that I was an exclusive pumper for. And they were never able to latch. And so I started pumping right away. Also in the hospital as a pediatric nurse, sometimes our care plan does involve asking the parent to pump in conjunction with breastfeeding directly after nursing, to kind of stimulate that milk and supplement their baby with the pump breast milk if their baby is a little bit underweight and we're trying to help increase the weight in the baby, or we're trying to help them increase the breast milk. So really the beginning of starting to pump is individualized, and it all depends on the factors that are at hand and what your goal is ultimately and what is going on with your baby.
Brandy, did you want me to touch upon, if you have a baby who does go to the NICU, what the beginning of your pumping journey might look like?
Yes, please.
Okay, awesome. So for those either who are planning on exclusively pumping from the beginning, and for those whose babies do go to the NICU and you're unable to have that initial breastfeeding experience, we recommend pumping from the beginning. So right away, we recommend at least within the first 2 hours of birth, and if that's not possible, within the first 6 hours of birth. So in those initial 48 hours, as Brandy mentioned, it's going to be that thick, delicious colostrum that may not be as easy to collect in a pump setting, because it does tend to get trapped in the little duckbills because it's so thick and it is a smaller volume. So for that, we do recommend hand expression, where you have your thumb and index finger about just outside your areola. You push back, pinch down, and milk toward your nipple. And you do that several times to elicit milk drops. And then from there, and this is the same process for that antenatal colostrum collection that Brandy was talking about, you can either take, whether it's a spoon, a syringe, they have colostrum collection containers now as well online, to be able to—
things that look like— Yeah.
No,
Oh,
that's for
really?
pumping. Yeah, these are like almost like droppers that can suck them out, or you can pop off the top to drip it into.
Amazing.
Dropping some names, Haka has a whole colostrum collection kit that makes it a little bit easier to do this hand expression colostrum collecting. So once you start that, you do want to stimulate your breasts through hand expression or pumping at least 8 to 10 times in 24 hours. And that generally seems overwhelming, especially if you're also going through a stressful situation because your baby has come to the NICU. But the main thing you're trying to do to your body is mimic a term healthy newborn. So even if you deliver at 26 weeks and you're premature, you have to signal to your body that you had a term baby, because your body's timeline starts as soon as that placenta is delivered. So 8 to 10 times turns into every 2 to 3 hours during the day, and then maybe a 4-hour stretch or 2 4-hour stretches at night, just so that you can also get some rest. And as your milk volume starts to increase on day 2, 3 onward, then the pump will be effective, and you will be using your pump on the milk initiation settings to bring in that milk and to really get your volume to increase. But for your whole pumping journey, it has been shown to increase your milk supply if you hand express before you pump and use hands-on pumping during pumping. So there's my little spiel on NICU and exclusive pumping from the beginning.
That's great. Awesome. Brandy, I think, did you talk yet about kind of like once breastfeeding is established when you should start pumping, or what to do if you're feeling like you need a break from breastfeeding and you need other family to be able to help feed the baby?
Right. So pumping is really beneficial if you do need a break, you're going back to work. You know, someone is going to watch the baby for an extended period of time, or if you just want to be an exclusive pumper. So once your milk is established, and like Katie was saying, your milk does tend to come in between day 3 and day 5. Breast milk is a supply and demand type situation. So the more that the breasts are stimulated by breastfeeding, pumping, or a combination of both, it triggers your brain to tell your breast to create more milk. So once your milk has well established, depending on your feeding routine or your feeding journey, you can pump as little or as much as you want, but do keep in mind that breast milk is a supply and demand type situation. So if your breasts are not stimulated by breastfeeding or pumping every 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours maximum, like Katie was saying, you can see a decrease in your milk supply because the breasts are saying that the milk that is being produced is not the amount that the baby's going to need. So eventually your body will say, well, we don't need to make this much milk anymore. So
I was like, I feel like I dealt with, you know, we talk a lot about folks who are trying to get their milk supply up, and I feel like it's not talked about as much. People who struggle with oversupply and the engorgement that a lot of people experience in those early days, which for me was really hard. And then I felt like I was so engorged, I wanted to get all the milk out. And the lactation consultants were telling me, no, stop pumping because you're just making it worse. The more you pump to try and get the hard engorged the milk out, the more milk your body's going to keep making. And so it took me almost 12 weeks to regulate my supply with both kids because I was dealing with so much oversupply of milk. I think at one point the lactation consultant told me I had enough milk for triplets. I was like, that's not my goal. So I think that supply and demand thing is like really important to remember on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, typically
we have a question. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Katie, and then we'll answer the question.
I was just going to say that very often we do recommend, if your situation allows it, to really wait till your nursing journey is established, because you, as you mentioned, your baby can really regulate your supply better because you can signal to your body that you have triplets, or that you have, as Randy mentioned, you need less milk because you're kind of artificially influencing it. So if you're able to latch your baby directly, let them guide your supply for those first at least 2 weeks. Some recommend 4 weeks, and then it's going to be less impactful on if you start adding in pumping or doing some pumping and bottling. So if it's possible in your situation, we often do recommend getting that nursing process established. Let your baby guide where your milk supply is and adjusting if your journey is different from that.
Yeah, and I'll just say my journey was different from that. With both kids, I was ready to introduce a bottle at 7 days because I just needed to sleep a little longer. Like I realized that only like having to wake up every 2 to 3 hours to feed the baby, I was like not a functional human. And so if I could just get 1 4-hour stretch, I was like a new person. And so being able to pump just enough in those early days to introduce a bottle at 7 days for me, like just gave me the mental health that I needed to be able to like get through the next couple of hard weeks. So, you know, work with your lactation consultant and like figure out what works best for you. Like Katie said, like adjust. There are kind of these best practices that we're sharing, but like if your mental health is struggling, if you're really sleep deprived, if you're in pain, like there are so many adjustments that you can make to the journey.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of different products that are out on the market that are also good at helping to collect milk. So another good strategy would be to, if you're breastfeeding, to place the haka on the other side and let it collect the milk. And that way you can store that milk for future use, either the refrigerator or the freezer. And then like you were saying, Jen, someone else can go ahead and take the next shift for feeding the baby so that you can relax, go take a nap, go for a walk, go to the store by yourself, take a hot shower, which is far and few between when we first give birth to our babies. Eat something yourself, you know, take some time for yourself, because as you were saying, Jen, You know, having a baby is really, really hard. And then trying to establish breastfeeding and pumping does take a toll on our mental health. You feel inadequate as you're waiting for the milk to come in. You may not see an increase right away in the milk. And you may compare yourself to people that you see online in different groups where they're posting pictures of, you know, pumping 15 ounces in one sitting, you know, and you may pump 1 ounce or 2 ounces in your sitting, and you're feeling like, well, why am I not pumping as much as this other person? You know, which does play a part in our mental health. So it's good to have different supplies to be able to have someone else feed that baby for you. The Haka is great. The various pumps that Katie was talking about is great. You know, there's a lot of different things that you can use so that somebody else can get involved and help with that baby.
Absolutely. And I think like the $1 million question here, because I know we've got quite a few mamas here who are expecting right now, does pumping hurt? Should it hurt? And if it does hurt, what do you do?
Yeah, so pumping is not supposed to hurt. It is a new experience, and so it's going to feel a little bit weird at first. It's supposed to feel like a tugging, pulling sensation, but it's not supposed to hurt. So the reason why it could hurt is because your flange size, like Katie was talking about, is not the right size for your breast. And also, as Katie mentioned, our breast anatomy is different. It's like shoes. Not everybody wears the same size of shoes. Not everybody's foot is the same. And so that's the same with your breasts. If you have a flange that's too small, it's going to rump up against the sides of the nipple and cause damage and pain. And you're not going to get adequate milk output. And the same is true if you have a flange that's too big. You're not going to be able to get adequate milk output. So that being said, if you are using a flange that is either too small or too big, it's going to cause problems in your breastfeeding and pumping journey and will cause pain. Also, there's different levels of suction depending on what kind of pump you have, and different programs on the pump. And so you always want to make sure that you start on the lowest setting and you slowly work up to the setting that you feel that is adequate for you. Some pumps have the second letdown button. Sometimes it looks like the little milk drop. Other times it's a different button. And that also is helpful to put on a different setting for you to initiate that second letdown. Likewise, you could have pain because you have milk stuck in the milk ducts. And so as Katie was explaining, when you are pumping or breastfeeding, you want to always make sure that you are massaging. And so the best way to do that is having a hands-free pumping bra, so that you can be hands-free when you're pumping. And so when you are pumping, you want to make sure that you are just getting around all the milk ducts and just making sure that you are massaging any hard areas that you feel, or any areas that may have milk stuck in them. Because sometimes when you have hard nodules, you want to massage, because that means that the milk is like stuck around here. And then that wonderful massager that Jen was demonstrating, that's awesome to have as well.
This is from Frida. I think Crane makes one as well, but these heat up and they vibrate. With my first baby, I actually used my electric toothbrush whenever I would feel a hard spot and a clog. So in a pinch, try your electric toothbrush. Sometimes that massaging action can help too.
And I'll also throw it in there that if you are pumping a lot, or if you're very tender from the early days of nursing, sometimes either putting a little nipple cream on the inner circle of your flange or on your nipple right before you pump can just lubricate it a little more, depending on what your material is. Sometimes we get a little sore from the plastic flanges. And so sometimes a little nipple cream can go a long way.
Absolutely. And I have these little pads from a company called Bojen that are like these little cushions that you can put inside of your flange. There's another product called a Pump and Pal that can help you get kind of a softer, cushiony type of feeling inside that flange if you are experiencing pain. So there's a lot of different products you can try out there to help get through it.
For myself, I use the Pump and Pals in my flange because, like you said, it's got the hard plastic, and after so much of you just, pumping, it's going to cause a lot of friction. So using, like you said, the Bojens or the Pump and Pals inside kind of create like a cushiony barrier. And I know for myself, it really helped to ease some of the discomfort as well. once I knew what kind of flange size that I needed to use for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry, Samantha, that I missed your question a few minutes ago. I got distracted, but she wanted to know a little bit more about supply and demand when you're pregnant, but still nursing your older child. Do the hormones impact your supply? And so how can you increase your supply if you're pregnant and breastfeeding at the same time? Katie, you look like you know this one.
I'm happy to take it. Is that okay, Brandon?
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Okay. So your milk supply works on supply and demand unless hormones get involved. So whether it's you get pregnant, you take birth control, even though low hormone birth controls can affect milk supply, you get your period back, all of those things will cause your milk supply to dip. And when it comes to tandem nursing or nursing your older child while you're pregnant, there will be the dip. And if your older child's over a year, they likely will just roll through it. They may kind of not be as into it for that little period, but then your milk supply does pick back up after the initial trimester and those hormones. Sometimes the older toddler then will wean themselves off and then get back into the game when you have the newborn and they see the nursing again. If your baby is under a year and you get pregnant again, then you do have to be on the lookout for supply issues and growth and making sure that your baby is getting enough, and you may have to supplement a little bit in that period because supply and demand only goes so far because hormones are stronger.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's awesome. Thank you. So Brandy, in terms of like things you can do to help pumping, maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of the mental mind state that is helpful for pumping.
Yeah, so for myself, I know when I went back to work, being away from my own children is really, really hard. And that being said, sometimes mothers do have a decrease in their milk, a little dip in their milk when they do return to work. And that's completely normal. So some of the things that are good when you are pumping and trying to get your mindset in it, especially if you don't have your baby near you, is watching videos of your baby, cute little videos, having pictures of your baby with you, maybe bringing a blanket or a piece of clothing that smells like your baby, and just having that with you. And because, you know, our breasts are so amazing, our bodies are so amazing, that if you see a picture of your baby or smell something that has your baby scent on it, you know, or watch a video of your baby, it will trigger that milk production and that letdown when you are away from your baby and you have to pump for them. And it also makes us feel happy and ready to, you know, pump and it not be so much of a chore. Another thing that I really found helpful for me was.
Nope, I lost your sound, Brandy. Brandy, are you there? Try again, Brandy. No, I can't hear you. What happened? Oh no. You want to mute yourself and then unmute and see if you can come back on?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there, you're back. You're back.
Sorry. So what I was saying was that a hands-free pumping bra is great. That was a lifesaver for me when I had to pump when I was away from my babies. And that way you can utilize breast compressions and get the maximum amount of milk out. And then just thinking of pumping as like a little break. So what I would do is I would have my hands-free pumping bra, I'd get myself something to eat, some nice cup of tea, and I would just take that time to, you know, maybe catch up on text messages that I wasn't able to get to even when I was with the baby, or catch up on emails, or watch a little bit of a show while I'm pumping, you know, and just kind of think of it as kind of like a little me time. And so that thinking of it that way kind of puts you in a mindset of, this is not so much of a chore to pump the milk for the baby, but this is more of like my little break where I can just, you know,
Totally. And I don't know if this is woo-woo or not, but I like when you first experience letdown, it kind of feels different for everybody. When you're pumping, it's very obvious because you can see the milk starting to come. And if you're nursing, you can usually start to hear the baby swallowing more. But I tried like mental visualization and I would feel a warm sensation, kind of like a warm tingling in my breast when the milk was about to start coming. So like in my mind, I would start picturing a volcano and I like try to picture it erupting and like bringing the warm lava to the baby. I don't know, but like I feel like getting in your head, closing your eyes and trying to like visualize something that helps you. Or another image I think about is like a flower blooming and like releasing the petals. And so like think about those things to like help encourage that letdown to get as much milk out as you can.
Exactly.
Amy, go ahead, what you got?
And yeah, I was just going to add that sometimes, especially because pumping is usually interrupting your life is what it feels like. Sometimes I needed to sit down, put on a meditation app for like a minute just to get myself to take some deep breaths, slow down, relax, because your milk ducts will kind of constrict when you're stressed, when you're tense, when you're, in pain. So whatever you can do to kind of help yourself recharge, relax, as Brandy mentioned, making it a little bit more about you time, it will actually help your supply and help your letdown and be more efficient.
Right.
Totally.
Echoing what you said, Katie, about the supply situation, is I did want to mention, once your milk supply is well established, you will find that it's kind of like a roller coaster throughout the day of your supply. So don't be alarmed if you are going throughout the day and you get a little bit less than what you would get in the middle of the night or first thing in the morning, because we tend to make more milk in the middle of the night pumping or the first pump of the morning. And as the day goes on, your supply, you may get a little bit more, a little bit less throughout the day when you're pumping, and that's completely normal. So don't be alarmed if in the middle of the night you get, 5-6 ounces, and then say 10 o'clock in the morning, you get 2 or 3, and then later on you get like 6 or 7. It's completely normal for it to kind of go up and down throughout the day.
Totally.
And
I
one
was
of the
just
tips
gonna say,
I give moms, is that you can either put baby socks over your bottles, or I used to wear a nursing cover over myself when I'm pumping. So you're not staring at every drop coming out and stressing about your output.
Yes.
Stressing about your output is going to affect your supply.
Exactly.
So cover it up, whether it's covering up the bottles themselves or the whole process. I find that to be really helpful.
Yeah,
For me, I was going to say practically when I'm like at the office and I feel like I have a busy day with a ton of meetings, I'm running between like making sure that I'm like set up for success with like, I have my little pumping area right here. I've got this mini fridge. I think this thing was $50 online, and it's great to just have it right here. I'm not like putting my milk in the communal fridge in the kitchen or whatever. I've got like my whole closet I reorganized with nursing friendly, pumping friendly clothing. I've got on a nursing bra. This is the Belly Bandit leak proof bra, which I love. So I've kind of got my whole setup situation here. I've got, you can't see it, but like a little dish rack where I've got extra bottles and parts sitting all right there. So everything is like ready for me so that I don't have to like stress about it every single time. And sometimes just having extra supplies you don't have to worry about as cleaning as frequently is just like another way to like reduce the amount of stress around pumping at work.
Exactly.
Okay, I know we kind of went like a little bit off our agenda, ladies. So we talked about a lot of the supply and storage stuff already, how to pump, when to pump. Maybe could we talk a little bit as we're starting to get towards the end of the session here about how long you should pump? And I think that's kind of a 2-part question, because it could be like, how long do I pump each time I sit down to pump? And it also could be like, how long do I pump in terms of months, or like, what does the weaning process look like, which is kind of what I'm starting to go through now with my baby turning 1 next month. She's less and less interested in nursing and starting to think about introducing whole milk. So Brandy, I'll let you take the how long should you pump each session, and then I'll pass it to Katie for how long in general.
Yeah, so it depends on whether or not your milk is established and whether or not you're trying to increase your milk. I know that Katie had mentioned that if you have oversupply and you are stimulating your breast by pumping and breastfeeding, a lot of times it will trigger your body to create an overload of milk, which will lead to clogged ducts and sometimes mastitis, frequent engorgement. So it depends on your body, if you do suffer from oversupply, if you suffer from low supply, or if you're trying to build up a supply. So we say that you want to, like Katie had said, you want to pump initially 8 to 12 times a day, every 2 to 3 hours during the day, and up to 4 hours you can wait at night. And so that will help to increase the amount of milk that your body's producing, especially if in the beginning you're not producing a lot of milk. And also if you're going to be away from your baby and you don't already have an oversupply, and you need to have that milk to feed your baby, you want to be able to pump 8 to 12 times a day. And it varies on the time that you're pumping. So anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes, depending on how efficient your milk removal is, how strong your pump is, whether or not you have a hospital grade pump, you're using a hand pump, you're using a cordless pump like a Willow or an LV. So you want to pump and utilize the breast compressions until you feel like your breasts are soft and not hard. There's no hard areas, and you do not see any more milk coming out as you're pumping, and you initiate the second let down and you're not seeing anything, you're doing the hand expression, you're not seeing anything, then you can go ahead and stop.
So can you just elaborate on kind of what the definition of power pumping is? Because I have a friend who's actually an OBGYN who was, struggling with getting her supply up to be able to feed her baby. So she was doing power pumping in between each session. And I feel like she felt like she was spending 8 hours a day on her pump to get through the power pumping to build her supply. So kind of what does the range look like for folks who are like really working hard to increase supply, or like what's too much? What's like, don't ever pump this much? Because I feel like some people might be taking it to the extreme.
Yeah, so power pumping is basically what it says. It's an hour-long pumping episode or marathon. And it's good for if you have a lower supply and you're trying to boost up your milk supply. So it kind of mimics cluster feeding when the baby is wanting to nurse every 15 minutes or so continuously. So basically you pump for an hour straight, but you do 5 to 7 minutes pumping, and then you take a break. And then you go back 5 to 7 minutes, and then you take a break. And so you're pumping and you're emptying your breasts for that hour, but it's telling your brain to tell your breast to create more milk for that baby. And usually it takes a few days for you to see an increase. I know for myself, it took probably closer to a week for me to see an increase in my supply. But it's really beneficial if you feel like you're having a dip in supply, especially if you're returning to work and you're having to pump for your baby. And you just start to see a supply decrease. Power pumping is beneficial and does work for some people. It doesn't work for everybody, but it is a good option if you do want to try to increase your milk supply.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Katie. So I'll pass it to you to talk a little bit about kind of how many months or how long should you be pumping, and what does the weaning process look like? And if you could also just talk about like the hormonal impacts of the weaning process while you're at it.
Yes, we always kind of neglect that one. So really the how long is going to be dependent on your journey and your goals. If you are wanting to nurse past a year, you can typically stop pumping at a year. Typically when your baby's main source of nutrition is going to be breast milk or formula for the first year. And then once they hit the year, typically they're starting to really take on more with their solids and whole milk if that's your jam, other foods if that's not your jam. But essentially they naturally will take less breast milk and will take more from their food source. And nursing becomes more of an experience for comfort, for routine, for immunity, for all of the other things, but it's no longer the primary source of nutrition. So typically, and you can continue pumping after a year, but typically a year is when I say you can put that pump back on the shelf unless you're away from your baby for more than 24 hours. Then you might need to whip that back out if you're wanting to continue to nurse. As you mentioned, so for exclusive pumpers, it's going to be a little bit more of a deliberate process to wean off the pump because you haven't had a baby gradually take less and less and more from solids to kind of naturally let your body start to wean. So for a exclusive pumper, I would work with a lactation consultant to really find out, okay, what is your current strategy and how can we work together to have a goal over time. Ideally, you want to wean gradually. One, as you mentioned, those hormones, because they can be dramatic, and because you don't want to put yourself at risk for clogged ducts, mastitis, a breast infection from milk sitting in your breast. So ideally, weaning gradually. Again, that's not always possible. And if you have to wean more suddenly, I would work with a professional on coming up with the best way to wean for your situation. And then, as you mentioned, the hormonal consequences of weaning. Very often around 6 months, even when the baby's starting to take solids, you might have a little bit of a revisit of your postpartum baby blues type feelings, and a little bit more, and some of us get it more as anxiety and agitation. And then if you are starting to wean more closer to the end of the year, whenever that milk supply starts to go down a little bit naturally, you might experience some of those same hormonal feelings as you did postpartum. So it's always good to keep an eye on yourself, let your loved ones around you know, because very often you don't see it. You don't see it from inside your perspective. It's the people around you who are noticing that you're maybe snapping at them, or, you know, easily upset or really weepy, or whatever your personal expression is. But there will be hormonal changes as you wean, whether it's from the pump, from nursing, just your milk supply going down will shift your hormones.
Yeah, I think for me, I didn't experience postpartum anxiety and depression after I had my baby, but then I kind of weaned my older daughter gradually from like 12 to 16 months. I stopped pumping at work at 12 months, and then I eventually cut out the nighttime bedtime feed, and then I was just doing mornings until I think it just dried up, it went away. But when I looked back, I was like, oh my gosh, I was exhausted. I was going to work. I wasn't motivated. I was coming home at 7 o'clock, and I was like getting in bed as soon as I put the baby to bed. And then in hindsight, I was like, oh my gosh, it's because every time you release milk, you're getting this little like shot of happy hormones, of that oxytocin, and that's going away as you go through the weaning process. So your body just takes a couple of months to readjust. So thank you so much for sharing about that, Katie, because I think it's really important for everybody to know.
And you bring up the good point of, you say in hindsight, when looking back, again, you don't necessarily see it when you're in it. So that's why it's really important to let the people close to you know, so that they can kind of let you know, hey, you might need, whether it's to go to counseling or need a little something, or just giving yourself more grace because you're able to have it highlighted that this is what my body is going through. It's just like, I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, even just for PMS, I'm like, okay, I know that this is why I want to rip your head off right now, Mr. Husband, but I'm going to give myself grace. This is a normal feeling, and I'm not going to actively rip your head off, because this is me. So just being aware of that, might be what's happening, is really important.
Totally. Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to have one last question, and maybe we can just share some tips, ladies, about pumping when you're traveling away from your baby. And I realize we've been in a pandemic and people haven't really been traveling as much or away from their babies. But with my first daughter, I was constantly on the road and having to go through airports with breast milk. And I remember being so stressful. They would open every single baggie and try to like sniff it or something. They're like doing all of these weird tests to my milk. But I learned that if the milk is frozen, they won't open it. They won't touch it. But like, what were your kind of tips or tricks for when you were traveling or flying, for pumping and making sure you're bringing home enough milk for the baby?
So on your note, I usually always recommend, even though breast milk is exempt from the 3-ounce rule, typically if you have more than 3 ounces in your bag or in your bottle, that's when they'll test it. And for example, for me, I was a borderline supplier. So when I did go out of town, I was pumping every 2 hours. So I had a ton of milk when I would be gone for a full weekend, but I made sure that after my first experience, that everyone was in small enough increments that then they won't actually test it. So that's a big deal. The other thing is that they will not allow partially frozen ice packs through security. So what often happens is your hotel freezer is not cold enough to keep your ice packs frozen for while you're gone. So what I did was I talked to the front desk, and they would keep my ice packs in their freezers, and I got it at checkout so that then my ice packs were frozen for going through security.
And I would just keep Ziploc bags, like freezer size, gallon size bags in my bag. And then I would be at the airport and I would go to like a fountain drink machine and fill it up with ice from the drink machine just to like have fresh ice so I could like last the whole flight home with my milk.
Yeah.
But I think there's a new company, well, they're not really that new anymore, but in the last couple of years called Milk Stork. And a lot of companies are offering it as a perk or a benefit where you can actually ship your breast milk home, like overnight it back to your home. So you don't have to go through all the hassle of traveling with a cooler. Thanks for the tip, Cassandra. And, you know, trying to like hassle all of the extra time through security if you are traveling with milk. So yeah, check out milkstork.com. That's a great one. Brandy, any last parting words from you?
Just to echo about pumping while traveling, I really haven't traveled much, so I'm glad that Katie gave all those great tips about traveling on a plane. But I just wanted to echo, if you do have to return to work and you have a job where you cannot be connected to a wall pump, or you have multiple kids like myself that are all separate ages, what really saved me for my pumping journey, being a nurse and having multiple children, is a wearable pump. And so for me, I used the Willow, and that really saved me and helped me to be able to pump hands-free when I did not have access to the Spectra pump that I was using. And so I was able to drive my kids to school while I pumped. I was able to be at work and pump discreetly. And so I feel, they're not for everybody, but for myself, I feel like the wearable pump was a lifesaver for me.
Yeah. Totally. Well, that reminded me like another travel tip that I had, because I learned this the very hard way. I was once like, I'd flown from LA to New York and I was in an Uber all the way out to New York City, out to New Jersey. And I didn't have a way to plug in a pump in the car. So like you can't order a car charger for your pump, but having a hand pump in my bag. So if I'm on an airplane where there's not a power outlet or whatever, I've just got one that I can like literally hooked on. And I have like sat on a plane with somebody in the middle seat next to me, just pumping away. Like, and I just didn't care because I'm like, I got to get the milk out. This is a 6-hour flight. Like I don't have access to power. So like having a hand pump in your go bag.
Hand pumps are great and they're portable. You just throw it in your bag and, you know, you can use it when you're not around your baby. Like you said, if you're stuck on a flight or stuck in traffic, or, you know, you just need to relieve some engorgement, hand pumps are really, really great and very portable.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining today, and best of luck to those of you that are expecting your babies and with everybody on their feeding journey. Absolutely. Thank you to Boppy for hosting today's webinar. Again, they are giving away a Boppy nursing cover and a breastfeeding pillow. So if you RSVP'd on the Zoom link, which is available on Facebook, if that's where you're tuning in, we will pick a winner later today and notify the winners of the amazing products. So thank you, Katie. Thank you, Brandy, for sharing your amazing knowledge. We're so lucky to have had you guys here today, and wishing everybody a wonderful rest of your week.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.